Good afternoon and welcome to the March 30th, 2010 meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority. May we have the roll call, please?
Authority members: Draymond.
Here.
Friedman.
Here.
Mincy.
Here.
Krasian.
Here.
Quintero. Here. Weaver.
Here.
Chairman Najarian.
Here. May we have your report?
The agenda for the March 30th, 2010 regular meeting of the Glendale Housing Authority was posted on Thursday, March 25th, 2010 on the bulletin board outside City Hall.
Thank you. The next item?
Next item is approval of minutes.
So moved.
Second.
I was absent on the 16th, so I will abstain. If there are any other corrections or additions, seeing none, the minutes will be approved as submitted. Next item?
Next item is oral communications. There was one card submitted. Discussion is limited to items not part of this agenda. Each speaker is allowed 5 minutes. Members of the Housing Authority may question or respond to the speaker, but there will be no debate or decision, and the matter may be referred to staff through the Executive Director for investigation and report.
Thank you. And when you say 5 minutes, we're working within the guidelines of our annotated timer. Is that correct?
No, it will be 5 minutes.
Okay, we're going to hold you to that, Mr. Kazakian. First speaker is Herbert Milano.
Housing Authority Chair Najarian, members of the Housing Authority, city staff, my name is Herbert Milano. I feel to some extent fortunate to be addressing you with issues having to do with the social conditions that we find in the city. I feel fortunate because during the past 8 to 9 years, I've never imagined that I would be learning as much as I have concerning the social problems that a city has, the urban challenges that the city has, the budgeting, the financing, and the pressure and the influences that come to bear with how the city's finances are distributed. I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, went through a college education where you were faced with either philosophy or ethics, social issues, statistics, economics, and I think this is where all of that learning comes to play. This is the place where you can get to tap into all of that knowledge and say, are we doing the right thing? Are we making the right decisions in order to solve these problems? It is my contention that too often many claims are being made here. Sometimes the claim is made and action is taken, but the claims oftentimes are devoid of really a thorough and comprehensive overview. It's like in philosophy, you learn how to make you have a basic premise, and then you make conclusions. And the premise could be false, and the conclusions could be right, but sometimes the premise is totally wrong. And that's what I often find here, that sometimes the data that you need from which you develop the basic premise has not been fully fleshed out. You get a sliver of information that is only partial, you don't get the full picture, and then in a very short period of time you're forced to basically make a decision, or you feel compelled to make a decision right there and then on that particular day. I believe the following, that the problems that we have today with youth at risk, kids failing schools, kids with parents who are not supportive, kids whose family or parents may have mental issues, kids with mental issues, all of those problems eventually wind up at your discretion having to do with the budget, because they impact the police, or they would impact fire, or they would impact any of the other resources, because they're all part of a system. You cannot look at them in isolation and say, wait a second, we're just going to do a budget for the police and that's it. Or we're going to take advantage of a budget that would say the police can retire now on very, very luxurious salaries, and then forget about the fact that that money could very well have solved a lot of the very early problems. Today we benefit significantly from all of the inspections that the fire department does. So we have very, very few fires. Major fires are almost non-existent, maybe 5, in 1 year. Why? Because the preliminary work that was done, the due diligence, eventually impacted, and created a safe city. So if we're able to do that for buildings, why can't we do that for children and for families at risk, and provide the sort of funds and the allocation of funds that would help to support those organizations that truly help out at the end, maybe in a decade or 2 decades, the impact that it's going to have on the rest of the resources of the state. I truly believe that. I think that the money is there. It's just misused to a great extent because of the influences that other people bear on you. And that oftentimes that if you were to do the right thing, they will basically go against you when you run for office the next time. So if you don't support them, they'll go against you. But at the end of the day, someone has to say that is incorrect, that is not moral. The money is there. We have an $800 million budget. You know, imagine you spend 1%. You don't even spend 1% on issues to basically support precisely the areas that are needed. You know, I could talk about infrastructure or the quality of life issues, but I'm just addressing that part of it. We're not addressing it. Other cities do it, and they do it from the general fund, but the general fund can't sustain it because the money is going someplace else. The money is going, to a great degree, to people who are no longer serving the city, making $150,000, $180,000 a year in retirement for 30 years. It's unconscionable. You know, if we were fully rich, we had all the money in the world, we could say, okay, there's this amount of largesse. But at the end of the day, you got to say, how come we're not addressing the problems when they're most likely to be solved and addressed? And I think you don't deal with this thing in city council. I figure this is the place when you eventually have to deal with how to attend to those individuals and those families who are the most at risk. And it's my hope that as you prepare a budget, that you prepare a budget based upon that data that tells you this is what we need to correct, and you build the budget from those indicators. Not the way you do it right now and say, this is what we did last year, we're going to increase it another 2% or whatever. I think there is a way of basically approaching it, making the city work so much better for everyone. And I don't mean to berate any of you in this regard. It's just that I finally understand it. I finally understood that all that theory that I learned in college and all of the issues about the social state of a country, I now understand why it doesn't happen, why we don't make the improvements that are necessary. Because we can't have the dialogue. Because people come into pressure, whether you're being pressured by the Firefighters Association or the Police Association, to say, if you don't give us the money we want, you know, you bear the consequences. At the end of the day, you have to do the right thing. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I have no other cards. Mr. Weaver.
Mr. Stubber, this morning, budget study session, after Mr. Milano spoke and left, what did you say about the average retirement to employees is?
Gosh, that feels like such a long time ago now. I had noted that although the recent retirements the past 10 years and elevating costs are reason to be concerned and need to be addressed, certainly in Glendale's budget, that I need to still point out that based on actuarial information of recent, the average safety employee from Glendale who is retired in Glendale earns $39,000 a year in their retirement, and the average non-safety is $34,000 a year in their retirement. So clearly there are a large number of employees who have retired who are not up in the rarefied numbers that seem to get a lot of play today.
So we need technical data to where the $150,000 is coming from, that's flowing all over.
Well, they are the recent retirements. I mean, the answer is they are the recent retirements. With the improved retirement programs and what you've seen salaries do over the past 10 years, both in the public sector and until this downturn, the private sector. So that's what drives that. People who have 35 and 40 years of service under the current plans can achieve, safety program is 90% of the single highest year. So as I noted this morning, I too believe in the long term we need to begin to address those escalating costs by the creation of a new tier of retirement program for incoming employees to begin to address that long term.
The average is $39,000.
Correct, among those who retired from Glendale.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, Mayor Quintero.
This morning, for a person who hasn't worked under Social Security, that is, at a fairly young age, went to work for city government or state government, they would be receiving no Social Security retirement. In the event they did for a few years, whatever Social Security payment they receive would be cut by what they get under PERS. Just to make sure the public understood that.
Okay. Thank you. That will be the end of oral communications. Let's move on to the next item.
At 6, at the business agenda at 6A is a public hearing, Director of Community Redevelopment and Housing regarding Section 8 Public Housing Agency Annual Plan for Fiscal Year 2010-2011. 6A1 is a resolution adopting and authorizing the submission of the Public Housing Agency Annual Plan to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development.
Mr. Lanzafame or Mr. Starbird?
Yes, I'd like to introduce Cindy Williams, Administrative Analyst, who will present the annual plan for you.
Good afternoon, Housing Authority Chair and members of the board. Every year, the Housing Agency is required to submit an annual plan to the Department of Housing and Urban Development. And the purpose of the plan is to report any changes that the agency is looking to make to their policies or their procedures. And one of the biggest procedures or the process of submitting the plan is to meet with the resident advisory board members established by the agency so that they can make any comments on changes that the agency is planning to make, and also to gather any comments the community would like to make on changes. The plan was posted on our website, and we did a public notice indicating that we were open for comments for changes. As you can see, the plan that was provided for your review did not have any changes at this time, and we are eligible to submit a streamlined plan. So that's why it's a two-page report that we're eligible to submit. So if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Mr. Quintero?
I don't know if you can answer the question or not, but I'd like to see what we can do to increase the percentage of veterans that we work with under Section 8 and our overall affordable housing projects. And when I say veterans, I guess I'm more focused on those veterans that are returning from the different Gulf wars, which, when you think about it, basically started in the 90s. So it's been a number of years. Many of those veterans are actually Army Reserve, Marine Reserve, National Guard, etc. So they were essentially part-time service people, men and women, who in many cases have lost their jobs, don't have the jobs that they had years ago. So I want to do an affirmative type of approach to try to see what we can do to recruit more veterans for our program. So having said that, I don't know, how we go about doing it, but I'm very interested in pursuing that.
Mr. Starbird?
Yes, Mr. Chair, Mr. Quintero, when you mentioned that to me, my first reaction was we can do a couple of things. We can bring back for your discussion the prioritization of points for people who are on our Section 8 housing list. And in conjunction with that discussion, though, reevaluating those priorities doesn't do a lot of good unless you reopen your list, because I think veterans are currently given priority now. Likelihood is we've come to serve most of those who are at the top of the list. And that whole discussion of whether or not to open that list again will, engender feelings among many in the community who are still on the list or who would like to get onto the list. But we can bring that whole matter back to you for discussion. First and foremost, that prioritization of points for evaluating where people stand on the list as it relates to Section 8 is probably the most effective way to try and address that.
Right, well, I'd like to bring it up in the Housing Authority or whatever we need to do.
What we will do is we will contact our representative at our local HUD agency to see what we can do to make changes to our existing waiting list, if we can. And we can come back to you at that when we submit our changes for our administrative plan. We can address them at that time.
I'd also like to have the staff, and maybe I can help with that, but let's get in touch with some veteran agencies, and I don't mean the VA, but some of the other agencies that deal with homeless vets, with returning vets, et cetera, to see what the pool is like.
Since you raised the question, maybe you may know the answer. Are there any other housing benefits that are extended to veterans after their tour outside of a Section 8 or something? Are there VA housing benefits or anything of that nature?
There is a program called, is it BASH? BASH. Do you want to provide more information to that?
Yeah, there's a program called
Okay,
the
let me
BASH
open
program.
up the public hearing. Mr. Zovek, excuse me.
Peter Zovak, Community Redevelopment and Housing. In answer to your question, Chair Najarian, there is a program that we reported back, I want to say it was about 2 years ago in a memo to the Housing Authority. Department of Housing and Urban Development developed this program in cooperation with Veterans Administration, and they call it the VASH program. Similar to Section 8, it is for basically it's Section 8 housing and benefits for returning veterans who are homeless. So you go through a case management and assessment process at the Veterans Administration, and what they did is they chose certain housing authority agencies in close proximity to existing VA hospitals and services. So the City of Los Angeles received a VASH allocation, some agencies in San Francisco as well. And that is the only recent program that HUD has implemented with regards to veterans, and it is for homeless veterans. There's not necessarily a program for veterans who are not homeless but still struggling with their housing.
Mr. Starbird.
But it does strike me that when we bring back the discussion of the list as priorities, there may be some conversation you can have about the prioritization for affordable housing programs, first-time home buyer programs, all of those that we do, and whether or not there's any room within there to somehow give preference to returning veterans as you run those programs. I don't know, but it just strikes me there may be some things you can do. So we should probably include all those topics on that list to talk about.
And look, I think we're all aware, I mean, most people are aware that these weren't exactly professional soldiers that have been serving in these wars. These were reservists. They had the they had the luck to becoming reservists at a time when really they became mainline forces. So for a lot of these people, I mean, they live, this is their community. They don't live in Fort Hood or Camp Lejeune or Pendleton. I mean, they're from these, from this city and from these neighborhoods. And so they're the ones I think we need to outreach to and, see what's out there.
Okay. So we'll expect all that in the report. Thank you. Are there any other comments, questions? Mr. Lanzafame.
Mr. Chairman, just to acknowledge the staff, the reason that we're able to submit a streamlined report is because your housing authority is considered a high-achieving agency, and we've just went through a rigorous audit. And again, the staff in housing has done a great job, and they came out with wonderful remarks, and we'll be able to continue this streamlined reporting.
Thank you. And obviously the big thing that I hear, and I'm sure we all hear at different times, is the high demand for the Section 8 housing vouchers. So let's always be on the lookout and be alert for any creative ways that we can increase our vouchers or increase any portability. I think on the whole, the Section 8 voucher recipients have been and are good tenants. They don't carry a lot of the other ancillary problems that we see in some of the other communities with Section 8 households. So I personally don't have a problem at all in terms of increasing Section 8 availability. And, I guess that's an ongoing task to try and be creative and alert and aware of any other ways to increase those numbers. Any other comments? Okay, I'm going to close the public hearing then, and I'll take a motion.
Here. Generally, I'll move 6A1.
Second. Let's take roll call, please.
Authority members Draymond?
Yes.
Friedman?
Yes.
Mincy?
Yes.
Brazia?
Yes.
Quintero?
Yes.
Weaver?
Aye.
Chairman Najarian.
Yes. Next item is authority member and staff comments. Any other comments from the authority members or staff? Okay. Seeing none, we have no new business. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
And the housing authority is adjourned.